The guy is a total fraud. I expose him relentlessly. He's a master manipulator.
No.
And ladies and gentlemen, I hear some cheering and I also hear some booing. That means I'm talking the truth, the uncomfortable truth that they don't want you to know.
Kristi Leigh here with KLIM.News, Kristi Leigh Independent Media. And today I am with a candidate for Pennsylvania governor. This is Joe Gale. He's currently the county commissioner, been in that position for 2 terms. And this is in Montgomery County, which is the 3rd largest county in Pennsylvania, huge population there. And so you decided to throw your hat in the ring in Pennsylvania. So why did you decide to take this big leap?
Well, thanks for having me on your program. I really appreciate it. And I see that there's clearly an appetite to change course in Pennsylvania. At the last couple of years, we've had lockdowns, shutdowns, draconian mandates, and Pennsylvania's had enough of it. So I see there's a prime opportunity to change course, but I simply don't have faith in the Republican Party establishment. Far too often, they let us down. And I'm notorious for being very critical of the flaws, ineffectiveness, and corruption of the Republican Party. I'm registered Republican, but I don't associate with the Republican Party establishment swamp. And that gives me tremendous appeal to independents that I believe play a key factor in general elections. And I have the proven ability of firing up the conservative base because I'm not one of these weak rhinos. I'm a true pro-life conservative. And also I speak the language that independents are thirsty to hear because I'm critical of the flaws of my own party. So I believe I have the right brand with the right style and the right location to actually have success in a statewide campaign here in Pennsylvania. And the Democrat nominee for governor will be Josh Shapiro, who's a current Democrat attorney general and a former Democrat Montgomery County Commissioner. I used to serve on the board with him. So me developing a lot of personal relationships and name recognition right in his home turf, I believe gives me a solid advantage to defeat him in the general election. But first, I have to win the Republican primary, which is on May 17th and is a very crowded field. And I've been working tirelessly for over a year and a half, meeting with Republican primary voters directly in their living rooms through a series of meet and greets called A Cup of Joe. It's a catchy phrase for a coffee klatch. And every single day, multiple times on the weekend, all over the state of Pennsylvania, I go directly into living rooms and meet with people one-on-one and develop a loyal bond of support. And that's what makes me a very unique candidate.
You are a unique candidate, and that's why I decided to take the time to talk to you today. I did get to see some of your speeches. You're quite the spitfire out there. But on that note, it doesn't seem like it's earning you any friends, we'll say. I mean, wasn't even there a governor debate just on Wednesday night that you were not a part of?
Yes. So there's 9 candidates running. They do everything possible, the establishment swamp, to exclude me from the debate stage. Because if your viewers search Joe Gale on the internet, YouTube, they'll see videos with me at some of the debates where I have been invited, where I am relentless with going after the flaws and ineffectiveness of other Republicans, where the other guys don't do that. Their whole message is Democrats bad, Republicans good. And I come in and say, wait a minute, you're all bad, and this is why, and you're all colluding together. So that was what really separates me. But last night there was a debate with qualifications required to participate in the debate. And one of the qualifications was polling at a certain level. And just this week, within 1 week, I received 3 polls to my cell phone directly where it lists 8 candidates running for the Republican primary for governor. And my name's excluded. There's 9 candidates. They only list 8. So obviously I'm doing something right when they're even trying to manipulate the polling to get me off debate stages. But the only poll that really matters is on election day, May 17th. And I know I'm going to overperform all these polls because I'm excluded from them. So they're in for a rude awakening. And I know because I've had 4 successful upsets where every primary and general election I've had for Montgomery County Commissioner, like you mentioned, which is a very large county in population, I never have the support of my own party. And in fact, the Republican Party colludes with the Democrat Party to unseat me. They spent millions of dollars. It's always a big negative smear campaign. And I overcome all the odds and I win these big David and Goliath upsets because of my strategy of going right to the people. And that's always been the key to my success. And I'm confident that'll carry over into this campaign for governor.
Now, I do want to talk about some of those negative smear campaigns, but first, I want to talk about one of the debates that I saw you in. One of the questions posed was, a lot of people talk about your, we'll say, aggressiveness and being able to come after these other Republicans, and they were framing that as a negative thing and that could hurt your campaign. But, we see in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, he's certainly not mincing any words. Do you feel like that's actually more of an advantage to just tell it like it is and not put up with media spin and all of that?
Absolutely. I see it as a tremendous advantage. And I say that if the worst thing a critic can say about Joe Gale is that he's too aggressive and he has too much of a backbone and he's not afraid to go on the attack, I think that's a positive. That's an asset. And that's what we need in government. We have too many Republicans that are spineless, wishy-washy rhinos that have no backbone. And I hold them accountable. And Pennsylvania is unique. We have a Democrat governor right now, but we actually have a Republican majority in our state Senate and the state House. And the last time we had a Republican governor and a Republican majority in the state legislature was the last Republican governor we had. That was Tom Corbett, who was such a disaster. He was unable to get reelected in 2014. And that's how we ended up with Democrat Governor Tom Wolf. And typically an incumbent wins a second term. But in fact, in 2014, the only incumbent Republican governors not to be reelected was a governor of California and Corbett in Pennsylvania. And the reason why Corbett was unable to get reelected was the infamous Corbett gas tax, which was Act 89, which gave Pennsylvania the highest gas tax in the whole entire nation. And that revenue collected is supposed to go towards fixing our roads. And any of your viewers that have been in Pennsylvania will probably vouch along with me. We have the worst roads in the country with all these potholes and closed bridges. It's obviously not working. But that highest gas tax in the nation was given to us with a Republican governor and a Republican majority in the state Senate and the state House. And that was the opportunity to accomplish a conservative agenda for Pennsylvania. And that includes paycheck protection. That includes pension reform for state employees, moving new hires from defined benefit to defined contribution plans, property tax reform, school choice, voter ID, traditional marriage between a man and a woman collapsed under Corbett. So the list goes on and on and on. So they really squandered a prime opportunity to advance a conservative agenda here in Pennsylvania, and they didn't do it. And in return, that alienated so many conservatives that felt let down that they were not energized and motivated to reelect Corbett. And that's how we ended up with Wolf. So I blame the weak Republicans on giving us Democrat government, and also liberalism and transgenderism and wokeism, cancel culture rammed down our throats. We don't have anyone championing the right. And I'm a true pro-life, solid conservative in the Philadelphia suburbs. I'm not supposed to exist there, but I'm an anomaly because I have a unique brand. I don't alienate my base. I fire up my base, and I also appeal to independence.
You call to mind someone like Ron Paul, just only because he was independent, more libertarian, but ran as a Republican because he was playing the game. And it sounds like you would kind of say the same thing, that you're more independent than anything. I want to ask you about, I'm sitting next to a play of John F. Kennedy, a Democrat, but this Democrat looks a lot different than the Democrats of today. Do you think that you've seen a lot of changes with what it means to be a Republican as well? Is it a lot different today than it was in the past?
Well, first of all, John F. Kennedy, Harry Truman, they would not be a Democrat in today's society. The Democrat Party has shifted so far to the left with these radicals like AOC and Bernie Sanders, but I blame that on weak Republicans that are not championing the right. And an example of that are previous Republican nominees for president, Mitt Romney in 2012. He had Romney Care, the healthcare system in Massachusetts, that took Obamacare, the biggest issue on the table during the 2012 presidential election, right off the table, because he socialized medicine in his state. And then prior to that, in 2008, you had John McCain, who was one of the most liberal members of the U.S. Senate, as our Republican nominee for president. And then you saw a change, a shift in 2016 with Donald Trump, where he had a populist message, where he resonated with conservatives and disgruntled Democrats and independents. And that's why he was elected in 2016. And I believe he won that that general election in 2016 in his primary, when he beat the top 16 Republicans that were on that debate stage, Rubio, Cruz, Ben Carson, Jeb Bush, and one by one, he took them out. And when he was on that debate stage, he stood out because he was critical of Mitt Romney, of John McCain, the previous nominees of his own party, and also the last Republican president we had at that time, which was George Bush, who also was a disaster. And he had the guts to say it. And the other guys can't because they're made by the Republican establishment system, and the system can also break them. And he had the independence to say what he thought, and a lot of citizens across the country thought, and it particularly resonated in Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Ohio, states like Pennsylvania, that a Republican hasn't won since 1988. Trump was the first Republican to win Pennsylvania in 2016. And I have that same brand. And I'm also the first elected official from Pennsylvania to formally endorse Trump for president back in 2016. And I had my big first upset for Montgomery County Commissioner in 2015. And I did so many Cup of Joes, so many meet and greets, that I had a pulse of the people. And I knew that the people were looking for someone to go into government, burn it down, and rebuild it because it's broken. And I offer that. And I had a recent debate where they said, you know, sometimes Joe Gale's too prickly. And I said, yeah, I'm going to go in with a flamethrower and burn it down and rebuild it because it's broken. And that's what really is what the people are looking for. They don't want the status quo. They don't want people that go on to get along. They don't want control.
They don't want politicians.
Yes. And that's not what I am. I'm a young guy. I'm the youngest commissioner in the history of my county. I was 26 years old when I was originally elected. I'm now 33 years old. I believe I would be the youngest governor in the history of Pennsylvania. So people desperately want young blood in the conservative movement that's bold and not controlled. And then out of this crowded field of 9 candidates, that's what truly separates me. Because primaries are challenging because everybody's Republican running on the Republican platform. So issue-wise, you're all the same. At least they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. The big difference is I am uncontrollable. I was never created by the Republican swamp, and that gives me the ability to hold accountable a Republican state legislature. So you'd have me in the executive position as governor holding accountable a Republican legislature that has a long history of letting us down. And then I can actually deliver results. Because a lot of the problems we face in society, we know that liberalism contributes to it. We already know that. We simply need Republicans to do what they're supposed to do, and far too often they don't.
One thing that many of us think has affected elections is this huge tidal wave of censorship and cancel culture. And I mean, now that's a big discussion with this takeover, we'll call it, by Elon Musk that looks like it may go through. So you are no stranger to obviously either of those things if you can't even make it on a list of actual candidates. And then back in June of 2020, you faced some cancel culture or backlash for things that you said about BLM. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I had an experience in June of 2020 where I experienced a national news story that went viral, and that was involving Black Lives Matter. So just like you and your viewers, I watched on television when city after city, including Center City, Philadelphia, looked like a third world country war zone with the looting and the arson, and they were getting away with it. No one was saying anything. And as a commissioner in the neighboring county of Philadelphia, I felt compelled to say something because many of my constituents own those businesses that were destroyed. And I released a statement on June 1st titled Riots and Looting in Philadelphia. And in my statement, I criticized Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney and their police commissioner, Danielle Outlaw, for ordering law enforcement to stand down and let all that chaos escalate. And then I went on to speak the pure truth about Black Lives Matter. And as far as I'm aware, I'm literally the first to do that in the nation. People are talking about Antifa, which is easy. I called out BLM, and I took a lot of heat for it. And the controversial part was, I said radical left-wing hate groups like Black Lives Matter are perpetrators of domestic terror. And it triggered this big uproar. That's the truth. They're radical, they're left-wing, and they're perpetrators of domestic terror because they're instilling fear in the general public.
With the violence, do you see the points that people have protested that they have made about racial inequities?
I saw city after city across this entire nation have a protest followed by looting, arson, and violence, and that's unacceptable. We need law and order. And Black Lives Matter played a significant role in it, and I said it. And I wish more Republicans had the backbone to speak the truth about Black Lives Matter. What they did was not a positive of our nation, it was a negative. And I had the backbone to say it.
10% of the protests across the country, according to the Washington Post, had violence. I think it was less than that. I think it was closer to 6%.
Well, you know what? You have a lot of nerve, because there's people that died, including law enforcement members of our community that died during those protests. So don't tell me that it was low levels of violence. There was heavy violence. In the city of Philadelphia, there were police cars torched, buildings burnt down, businesses that never can come back because of Black Lives Matter and radicals that should not have done what they did to our city. It didn't help any kind of camaraderie in our society. It destroyed that.
Well, I don't know about nerve, but I was just pointing out what the research showed.
And you should be ashamed of yourself for saying that there wasn't violence at those protests.
I didn't say that.
That's what you said.
No, I didn't. I
yes,
said,
you did. Less than 10%. That's what you said.
That means there still was some violence. I didn't say no violence.
Well, there should be no violence. We need law and order. We shouldn't defund police. We need to enforce the law and hold criminals accountable and not go over after law-abiding citizens that aren't part of the problem.
Well, it blew up and became a national story when 3 celebrities got involved. One was a basketball player on the Philadelphia Sixers, was calling for him to resign. Another was Meek Mill, who's a rapper. And he also went to prison. He's a real pillar of the community, but he calls me to resign. And one was a paparazzi reporter on TMZ named Perez Hilton, who's an activist and apparently dresses up as a woman. I didn't know much about him until he tweeted me, but he has a big following. And at that point, it became a national story. And it led to a series of protests. I had 500 Black Lives Matter activists in front of my home.
County protesters rallied outside Commissioner Joe Gale's house in Plymouth meeting this afternoon. They are again demanding for the Republican to resign after he called Black Lives Matter a hate group and compared looting to domestic terrorism. Today, Commissioner Gale told Eyewitness News he stands by his comments.
The police had to barricade the property. There's a series of protests by the thousands at our county courthouse. I was getting death threats. And on top of all that, there was an effort to impeach me. And ever since Donald Trump's been impeached twice, I consider that a big badge of honor. It means you're doing something right. And I wouldn't back down this entire process. And I'm actually the first county commissioner to ever experience impeachment charges. But that was taking place in my state legislature. Wow. So I have a long history of taking on the fights that a lot of weak Republicans are afraid to even touch or get near. And I do it fearlessly. So that helps me stand out. And I believe we need a fearless conservative in all levels of government, and desperately here in Harrisburg. And you don't see enough of it in Washington. I'll see guys that are in the U.S. Senate like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz. There's no doubt that they're a conservative. But at a hearing, they'll go after Rachel Levine. They'll go after Dr. Fauci. But you never once see Rand Paul go after the sitting senator from his home state of Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, who's the majority leader in the Senate and an absolute failure and disaster, because he can't. Because everyone in politics was created by the system, the establishment. And I didn't. I'm a young guy that didn't kiss rings. I never played Mother May I. I take on my own party, and I do it fearlessly. And I believe that's desperately needed in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as this whole thing, I mean, being a journalist, I'm very aware of words, how things are worded. And it's very obvious to me that any criticism of Black Lives Matter was automatically as if you were saying Black lives do not matter, when most of those that were raising concerns were talking about the group itself. So there's Black Lives Matter as a saying, yes, they do. And then there's Black Lives Matter as a group. As I've seen more come out about the mismanagement of funds, these $1 million houses, nothing to show for the money they've collected, what have they done for minorities and communities? I feel like there's been a bit of a back off of the Black Lives Matter movement. Would you say that you've seen that?
Oh, yeah. I think now with all the evidence we've seen over the last 2 years, particularly with how they're handling their funds, that organization's a big sham, and they created more divisiveness in our nation. So their goal to accomplish better personal relationships between members of the community obviously did not work. There was violence, there was arson, looting that did not help the cause whatsoever. I believe it had a negative impact. And all these protests that Black Lives Matter had were followed by looting and arson in practically every major city across the nation. So they played a significant role in all that damage and violence that occurred. And I had the courage to say it. And I turned the table on the liberals, because when they were coming down on me, I said, you know what true systemic racism is? The disproportionate number of unborn Black lives murdered by abortion. I never hear Black Lives Matter talking about that. I never see them doing prayer vigils outside of Planned Parenthood. And another systemic problem when it comes to racism is black on black crime. In Philadelphia, they had an all-time record high level murder rate in 2021. Unfortunately, it looks like 2022 will even surpass that. But they also had a record high level of black on black crime, and they don't talk about that. Instead, they try to demonize law enforcement, which is not a true systemic problem when it comes to racism. And I know when I spoke during 2020, I spoke for millions of people across the country that agree with what I had to say. And I believe Black Lives Matter is a hypocritical organization, and they did a disservice to creating peace in our nation.
One of the ways that Pennsylvania, the state, was really put on the map was in the 2020 election, and just the rules that were changed and the questions on if it was legal, the changes that were made,
Yes.
and how to move forward. What is your take on all of that?
So I'm the only county commissioner in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to oppose certifying the election results. In the primary of 2020, before anybody was talking about voter fraud, also the general election of 2020, the big one, and the primary and general election of 2021. Because I recognize that we've now had 4 elections in Pennsylvania conducted under unconstitutional voting guidelines. This is a real scandal. And if it weren't for me talking about Act 77, which is the unconstitutional mail-in voting law, which gave Pennsylvania 50 days of no excuse mail-in voting, the longest vote by mail period of time in the entire nation, this issue would be swept under the carpet. Because what happened was, here in Pennsylvania, the Republicans in the state legislature unanimously passed this mail-in voting law through the state Senate. The Democrats opposed it. But at the end of the day, they cut a deal with the Democrat governor. And the deal was Republicans in the legislature said, we will give you 50 days of no excuse mail-in voting. Again, the longest vote by mail period of time in the entire nation, for the exchange of the removal of straight ticket voting in the general election ballot, no longer having straight Democrat and straight Republican. Because the Republicans know that removing straight Democrat selfishly benefits the Republicans down ballot, meaning names that appear on the bottom, because it's been proven that in the masses, Democrat voters are less likely to go all the way down the ballot and vote for every individual candidate. But they will do the top of the ticket. And with straight Democrat gone, top of the ticket in 2020 was president. And that's what happened in Pennsylvania. Trump won president in 2016 in Pennsylvania. He lost in 2020, but down ballot, all the incumbent state reps and state senators were all reelected. In fact, Republicans picked up a couple seats around our state. So at the end of the day, they wanted to keep their seats safe seats, and at the same time, deliberately sabotage Trump at the top of the ticket. Because we have so many bad never Trumper Republicans all across our state. And the textbook example of a bad never Trumper is our U.S. Senator Pat Toomey, who's so unpopular, he's not running for a third term. In fact, my brother Sean Gale is running for the U.S. Senate seat. So there's 7 candidates running in that primary, and Sean Gale, my brother, is one of them. So we're really causing a lot of chaos for the establishment here in PA. But he voted to convict Donald Trump in that bogus kangaroo court impeachment hearing. And another example is a former Republican governor we had, Tom Ridge, who was there back in the 90s. And then in 2001, Bush made him Secretary of Homeland Security. He endorsed Joe Biden last year. So I can literally go on for hours about the type of bad Republicans we have in our state. But to change electoral college, it only takes a couple swing states, Pennsylvania being a key swing state. And they were plotting from day one when Trump beat Hillary to take him out. They knew they couldn't do it fair and square, and they had to unlawfully change our election laws. They amended the Constitution without following the proper process. They didn't pass 2 legislative sessions. They only passed 1 legislative session. They never did a voter referendum on the ballot where the voters decide on election day whether or not they support these amendments to the Constitution when it comes to voting. They didn't do any of that. They did it unconstitutionally. And the blood is on the hands of the Republicans.
I hear that so much that I have to ask, if there was so much that was illegal or unconstitutional, why has no court?
Fantastic question. And here in Pennsylvania, back in February, the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court had a ruling declaring that Act 77 was passed unconstitutionally. This is something I've been talking about for well over 2 years. But that Commonwealth Court ruling has since been appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And as we speak, the last few weeks, there's an oral argument taking place in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court where they're hearing the case. And I've been watching some of it. it's clear that the outcome's not going to go our way. But Kristi, I'm not optimistic because in the past, the legality of Act 77, Pennsylvania's mail-in voting law, went all the way up to United States Supreme Court, where we're supposed to have a 6-3 conservative bench. And they actually voted not to take the case, including Amy Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, two of Trump's appointees. So it shows you where their loyalty is. Their loyalty is with Mitch McConnell, because they appeared on the list of judges that McConnell could get confirmed for the Senate. And they don't want protesters in front of their home. They have a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. They don't want to jeopardize that lifestyle. And they actually voted not to take the case. So unfortunately, I believe we exhausted our legal options. And it's frustrating because a lot of this should be fixed legally in our courts, but our courts are so corrupt because we have political hacks that go on the bench.
Yeah. Well, I only have a couple more minutes with you. So what else do you want to say? How do you keep hope when you're excluded from major debates, when you're not even like sent as an alert to people? How do you keep hope that you have any chance of having a fair shot at this?
Well, I recognize this. No matter what happens in my primary on May 17th, I have a future in politics because I'm a young individual. And God willing, I have good health. I have longevity in this. And not one other name on that ballot in that crowded field has a future beyond 2022. So I view myself as the future of the conservative movement in Pennsylvania. I have a unique brand with a proven ability of winning very challenging races. And I'm optimistic about the future. And I believe I'm going to have a very good showing. And I do have a strong chance of winning the Republican nomination on Pennsylvania. But you asked what keeps me going. It's cup of joes, literally meeting with people, and the cup of coffee that gives me the energy to go. But more importantly, it's prayers. I'm an individual of extreme faith. And I recognize that what's most important in life is your family, your health, and your faith. And win or lose an election, and when you deal with hatred of protesters, impeachment charges, and all this constant negativity from my own party, I know I'm doing something right. And when you have strong faith, you're able to overcome obstacles and have perseverance. And that's something that's important to me. And what started my whole quest in public life back in 2015 was my Republican committee in my county endorsed a board member of Planned Parenthood for county commissioner, the Republican Party. And I never held office. And I went after the highest elected office in my county and ran unendorsed against the party to give people a clear conservative pro-life choice. And at that point, everybody said, this young guy doesn't have a chance. Nobody ever beats the party. The county's too big. And I won that primary by 1,000 votes on the dot, 1000, in a county with over 857,000 people.
Wow.
And on dark days, I always remind myself, for as long as I live, that initial primary I had in 2015 will always be the toughest race I ever have, and I won.